Yeah, I know. I do know millionaires and billionaires. That's for sure, and plenty of them because that's the kind of work that I do, and they're no different than anybody else, right? They just have more money, right? And but all of them have needs, and you find that a lot of them aren't any happier than you are. You need to think about who you need to know, who's going to make you successful in your career, right? And so for me, for the kind of work I was doing, venture capitalists were very important. They invest money in companies, and so I needed to get to know them. And so you need to figure out where do these people, and that was at the age of 24, and it changed my life. And you know what? So Axel, from the time that I was in that church in Panama until my wedding night, I was not with a woman sexually until I was married, and that was 4 years later.
How are you? How things are going?
Excellent. It's an honor to be here with you. Argentina is one of the places that's on my short list of places I want to go.
Okay, cool. I will help you to come here. Yeah, it's a really good place, a beautiful city, also Buenos Aires. So, well, Carl, today I want to just talk with you, have a real conversation about your life, your journey as a businessman, your personal path, and also I want to ask you some things about your purpose. So, the first question that I want to make you have wrote a book about how to live the abundant life. So I'm curious about this. Was there a specific turning point in your life when you realized what abundance truly means to you beyond just financial success?
Well, the book is not about finances at all. So that's, people hear the word abundance, and your average person thinks it's about money, but it's the last thing it's about is money. So abundance really lies in the relationships that you have in life, in the fulfillment that you get through those meaningful relationships. And so I start out with finding abundance in yourself, right? Because if you can't find abundance in yourself, you can't go looking externally for it. And so I start out with talking about maintaining or finding your purpose in life. Right. So many people wander through life and they don't know why they're here or why they're, walking the earth. And I try to take people through an exercise where they look and they discover, or they at least have tools for discovering what their purpose is. And, this is not something that I just woke up, when I was born and I knew what my purpose was. I had to go through discovery. And so this is really lessons learned. I'm probably a little older than your average listener. And so, I've lived more life. And so since I've lived more life, I've had more experience. And in having that experience, I made a lot of mistakes. And so what I'm trying to teach the readers to do is to learn from my mistakes and kind of get a running head start on life. And so I also talk in the book about maintaining a sound mind. So many people go through life just feasting on whatever thoughts come into their mind. And they may look in the mirror in the morning and they think, oh, I look like crap this morning. And they start feeding themselves negative thoughts, oh, I'm getting old, I'm getting overweight, I'm this or that or whatever, and it's just a constant negative loop that they put themselves in. And so I show the reader that you are the only person that controls what goes through your mind. And I give people tools for controlling that. And it may seem like an impossible thing to do, but I've actually developed tools, and I'm still developing tools to replace negative thoughts with positive thoughts. And we can get into some of that if you want to, but then I go into growing spiritually. And I put a notification at the beginning of the chapter. If you're not interested in this, just skip it, right? But that was
it's really interesting, brother.
There was a major point in my life where like I lived half of my life as an atheist, not believing in God. And then I came to this realization halfway through, and I can tell you the second half is better than the first half. And so I take people through that journey and what that looked like and how I did it and what I do and so forth. And then, these are kind of building blocks. And then I get into maintaining a healthy body, right? And it's not so much so you look good for the next person. I mean, that's nice, but you want to show up for yourself. You want to feel good about yourself when you look in the mirror Maybe
Yeah.
not first thing in the morning, maybe you fix your hair, or, if you have hair, but you get yourself, looking where the way you want to, and then you feed yourself positive information about yourself, right? I have so many people that are my age that say, "Oh, I'm getting old." And I'm like, I'm not, don't give me that. I'm not receiving that. Like I'm getting better every year. Like I am perfecting myself. I'm getting fitter. I'm growing younger. Maybe that sounds delusional, but I actually get on Zoom calls, and we just met, Axel, so you don't know, but I get on a Zoom with somebody I haven't seen in 10, 15 years, and they go, "You look younger." I'm like, "Oh, it's funny that you say that." Right? But you say stuff like I have a friend. I worked on a client with her yesterday, and we were sitting right across the table from each other. And the last time we sat across the table from each other, I was sick. I came in there, coughing and sneezing, and she said, "I don't get sick." And then last week she was supposed to be in there with me, but her kids had this neurovirus. You know what that is? Yeah.
Yeah.
What people get on cruise ships all the time, right? Where you're like throwing up and all that. And I said, did you get the neurovirus? She said, "No, I didn't get it." Right? Because she says, "I don't get sick." She proclaims that, and then she lives a very healthy lifestyle. She eats well, she exercises, and she doesn't get sick. 2 times she was exposed to 2 diseases, and she didn't get sick. And so,
I love it.
I'm going to start saying that, just like I say, "Man, you look good this morning." When I get up and I look in the mirror, you're getting better every day. Right. And then after maintaining a healthy body, I talk about pursuing personal growth. See, we haven't even gone outside yet. We're all inside still. And so I talk about things that seemed impossible for me to do. Think about things that you want to do that are impossible. And I talk about some of those things. Like when I was a young person, I didn't have the grades to get into Harvard. It wasn't a thing that I could do. But you know what? As I went through life, so many of the people that I work with, very, very successful people in the business community, and like half of them went to Harvard. And you know what? I thought, maybe I want to go to Harvard. And that might seem crazy as somebody, in their 40s or 50s to think about going to Harvard. And you know what? I went to Harvard. In 2019, I went to Harvard, and I got a certificate there. I've always seen people flying in airplanes. I said, I want to do that. You know what? I got my private pilot's license. Those might seem like crazy things to do, but they're impossible things that I wanted to do. And so I talk about how to take bite-size, goals and like break it up into goals so you can get there, right? I didn't just wake up and go to Harvard one day. I had to figure out how to get in, right? I didn't just wake up and fly an airplane one day. I had to figure out, like, all right, what does one need to do to fly an airplane or write a book, right? I wrote a book. That seemed impossible for me to do. I would sit down to write, and I'm like, oh my gosh, I can write a page, but not a book, And so I had to break it down. I had to break it down into doable pieces. And then, you know what? Even after I did that, I had like 8 chapters written, and I'm like, I need help. Like, I don't know how to do this. And so I got a company that produces books. They publish books. And I said, you guys have a service where you can help me do this? And they said, yeah, we can help you develop an outline. We can help you develop the content. And I said, yeah, I need help with that. I got like 8 chapters. It's not enough, right? And so they did. They walked me through. They forced me to do an outline. They forced me to lock it in. They forced me to answer questions about in that outline. Then after I answered all those questions, they interviewed me, and they got me to verbalize things I didn't put in writing. And then, you know what? We got a book today, right? It took a while, but I did it, And then after I do all the personal stuff, I talk about developing healthy relationships. And then, if you do the things I talk about in developing relationships, everybody's going to want to be your friend because you're doing nice things for people. You're not thinking about yourself. You're thinking about the other person. What can I do to help you become more successful? And once you start doing that for other people, everybody wants to be your friend, And so the next chapter is how to establish healthy boundaries, right? Because if everybody in the world wants to be your friend and they want to take all your time 24/7, you need to sleep, you need to exercise. I need a day of rest. I I take a day of rest every week. I shut my phone off. I unplug, right? And so I set boundaries. You want to talk to me? You're not talking to me on my rest day. You're not talking to me during my workout. You're not talking to me during the time I spend with my wife and things like that. And so and then I break it down and I talk about how to be likable, how to develop a lasting legacy. Everybody wants to have a legacy. They want to be remembered. So I talk about that, and I talk about being part of a community. Those are all very important pieces of having an abundant life.
I love it. I love it, Carl. Thank you for all this information about your book. It looks amazing, really. And what is that point in your life? But let's suppose there is a guy, okay, or a girl, whatever, that wanna like transition to a new way of living life. And you say, and one of the part that you used to don't believe in God. So what happened in your life that you change and you go from one level to the other one?
Well, you have to want to make a change, right? It starts with wanting to make a change. And so I was already at a point where I wanted to make a change. I was doing things in my life that I knew were wrong. I was conducting myself in a way that I wasn't happy. Just I was a young man. I was single. The way I was, interacting with women and so forth, it wasn't the best way to do this. I knew there was a better way. And so, and I'm just going to be kind of raw here, Alex. If you're a young man and you're meeting women and the first thing you're thinking about doing is like how you're going to get this woman in bed with you. Sorry, women, but this is how I used to think, right? It's not, is that the best way to do this? You want to get married? Are you married out, Axel?
No, not yet.
All right. So you want to get married, let me tell you, if you want to get married, the best way to meet the future mother of your children isn't to try to have sex with her right when you meet her. It's not the best way. Trust me. Okay.
Absolutely.
Been there, done that. You can have lots of sex, but it's empty. You're not developing a relationship that's going to endure. I've been married for 30 years. Okay. 30 years. You want to be married 30 years? Take some time to get to know the person you're going out with, right? And getting to know that person is not getting them in the bed. There's plenty of time to get in bed. Get to know. I took 3 years to get to know my wife. Now that may seem crazy in this day and age to spend 3 years getting to know, but if you're going to spend the next 30 years with them and you don't want to get divorced,
it's an investment.
Yeah, but I didn't know how to do that. Like as a young man, I didn't know how to do that, and so I was already trying to make these changes. And I think God intersected me with where I was, and He came and He met me. And so I'll tell you, I was the moment of the true change was I was down in Panama, not quite Argentina. I didn't quite make it to Argentina, but I was in Panama. Next best thing, right? And so, and I'm down there, and if you go back, this is a long time ago, the United States had just invaded Panama, and we were the first Army unit to stay off of a military post in a hotel in Panama City. And so I'm heading out of the hotel with soldiers from my Army unit. And I said to the guys, I said, "What are you guys doing tonight?" And they said, "Well, sir, we're gonna pursue this prostitute over here." And I'm like, this is not what I'm trying to do, right? Like, one, I never needed to resort to prostitutes, but two, that's not what I'm looking for. And so there was another guy who was assigned to our unit for training, and he was from Mississippi. This guy named Wayne. And I looked at Wayne. I said, "Wayne, what are you doing?" And he said, "Well, I looked out my window and I saw some lights down the street, and it looks like they're having a church service down there." So I really had 3 choices. I could go back to my room. I don't want to do that. I can go chase prostitutes with the other clowns. I didn't want to do that. And so I went with Wayne. I never really went to church, and so I didn't know anything about it. And so I went, and I didn't know what was going on there. I don't know if they do this in Argentina, but these people were carrying on in Spanish, and their hands were up in the air. And I didn't know
there are some places.
I didn't know what was going. I didn't know what was going on. I'm like, what are these people doing? Like, and why are they so happy? They're so happy. Like, these people have no money. I got everything. They have nothing, and they're happy. And so this is kind of registering for me. And so eventually, I'm standing in there in this congregation while they're singing and carrying on, and this wind blew. It blew through, like from the congregation. It blew right through me. It wasn't wasn't real wind. It was just something else. I didn't know what it was. And I looked over at Wayne and I said, Wayne, did you feel that? And he goes, yeah, I did. And I didn't know what had happened. So there's this black gentleman there. He looked like an American. I said, hey, are you from the States? He said, yeah, I am. I said, what is this? And he said, it's kind of like a U.S. Baptist church, which I didn't know what that was, you know? And so what I found though, Axel, was I went home and there was a girl I had met prior to going down to Panama and, you know, done some things I knew I shouldn't have done. And I went back to see this girl. And you know what? For the first time ever, I was there and I ran away. I didn't stick around. I just left. And she probably thought I was crazy, but something was different. Something was different in me. I didn't know what it was. And so all I knew was as I got back to, I was in graduate school at the time. I was studying to get my master's degree. All I knew was after my experience in Panama, I needed to be in a church. And I didn't know what church to go to. There were 20 churches on my street. And so I started going to two churches a morning and, you know, on Sundays. And eventually I settled into this church where the love that people had for each other was so overwhelming that it was like this infectious thing where I wanted to be part of this love. And so I started going there, and there were older people making me dinners. There were young women, you know, baking me cookies and wanting to marry me. And it was just beautiful. Like I never met people like this. And so I stuck around, and, you know, before the end of that semester, I ended up responding. And I had one more experience where that wind blew against 2 times.
Wow.
Second time, God touched me 2 times. And it was another situation where I was with 2 other people and they experienced it. And I was told what had happened. And so when the pastor said, quoting Jesus, he said, he who acknowledges me before man, I will acknowledge before my Father in heaven, but he who disowns me before man, I will disown before my Father in heaven. And I don't know how I knew what to do, but I got up out of my seat. I walked forward. I said, I need to acknowledge Jesus. And I did. And that day I was baptized and I was handed a Bible for the first time and started reading it. And that was at the age of 24, and it changed my life. And you know what? So Axel, from the time that I was in that church in Panama until my wedding night, I was not with a woman sexually until I was married, and that was 4 years later. And so I'm telling you, it was a major change in my life. And so I think, you know, part of making a change, like it sounds like a radical change, and people are like probably listening thinking, you're crazy, I don't want to stop having sex.
No
right?
way. It's really
You
valuable,
know,
man.
but I've been married 30 years. I have 5 kids. All's good. I'm still with the same woman, and you know, all is good on that front. And so I'm just saying, you know, you give up a little. It's just like, you know, you diet, right? You don't eat as much. You might not want to give up the food, but then when you go to the beach and you look good and you feel good, you're happy, right? And so 30 years of marriage, waiting 4 years, it was worth it. It was worth it. And you know, it's worth it. It like no pain, no gain.
Yeah. And Carl, keeping the line with this story about your wife, in your own opinion, so do you have to share the same faith with your wife to have and to build a really good relationship? What are your thoughts around that? Because you spent like 3 years to get to know the right woman. So how is that process for you? What do you recommend to somebody?
Well, we do share the same faith, and I think it helps a lot because you're in agreement on a lot of things, right? Like if you meet a woman and she's not in the same place as you, and you're like, I'm not gonna. I literally said, I said, if you want to sleep with me, you got to marry me. That's what I said to her. You know, some women might say, goodbye, you know, and maybe that's not the right woman, right? And she was the first woman I met who was okay with this. And so it helps to have shared faith. Although look, I spend a lot of time in the Middle East now, and I meet with a lot of Muslim friends, and I've got this interfaith ministry called Bridges of Faith, and my Muslim friends share a lot of the same values. And so, you know, they're actually more conservative than many of my Christian friends. And so I have Muslim friends who are married to Christian women, and it can work, but I still think there's a shared like values, right?
Yeah.
And I think it's difficult if you're going to raise children if you have different faiths. It's hard
Mm.
because most Muslims want to raise their kids Muslim. Although I've got very good friends who had like a Catholic mom and a Muslim dad, and they were raised with both ideas, and they might have practiced Islam for part of their life, and then they're practicing Christianity today. I mean, it's a journey, right? I mean,
Yeah.
it's a journey. For me personally, the shared faith has helped, but I think I've seen people make it work when it's not shared.
Okay. Love it, Carl. So now moving to your professional career. Okay. So you call yourself, I really like this title or name that you put yourself, super connector. So can you explain what is for you being a connector, and how do you apply that in your work? Because this is also has a relationship with the guy who crossed you in the street. Remember the guy who interviewed?
Oh, yeah.
And, also, and what happened with that? Because at that time, because of that guy, I met you, and I decided to follow you on LinkedIn.
Yeah. So that guy, the first time I met him, he was 22 years old, and I was in a hurry to get to a dinner. So I started this thing called the South by Southwest Sunday Service. It's become the largest event at South by Southwest. I don't know if you heard of South by Southwest. It's in Austin, Texas, where I live.
Okay.
And hundreds of thousands of people come from around the world for music, for technology,
Wow.
education, and film. It goes on for a whole month. It's huge, and that's what brought me to Austin, Texas. But anyway, so I'm going to this dinner associated with this event, and this guy, James is his name. He sticks a microphone in my face. I'm like, I don't have time for this. I'm late, and he starts asking me questions, crazy questions like what's the most
amount of money that you make?
Yeah, how much money have you made? I'm like, that's a rude question. I'm not answering that. Like, what are you talking about? But eventually he got me to answer some questions, and that doggone video went viral. It got 4 million views, and
yeah,
I had never gone viral like that before. And so I talked to that guy for a few minutes, and then I left, and I forgot all about him. I forgot I even talked to the guy, and
wow.
because I was busy. And so Monday, that was like a Saturday, I think it was. And Monday, a friend of mine from back in Virginia, I used to live in Virginia, she texted me. She goes, I saw you on TikTok. And I text her back. I said, I don't know what you're talking about. I'm not on TikTok. She goes, yes, you are. And she sent me the link, and it had like 800 and some thousand views. I'm like, holy crap, this thing went viral, and it just kept going and going and going. And those guys didn't know me. I didn't know them. And they didn't even tag me in the video. So the video you saw, I was properly tagged because that was the second time they talked to me. But the first time they talked to me, nobody even knew it was me, right? And so I found the guy's like social media profile, and I found him. I followed him. I'm like, dude, like, what'd you do? And so, anyways, I became friends with these guys. He's the interviewer, James. He's 24 now, and we've gone all the way to Saudi Arabia together. I mean, we're friends. And he's got a great business. It's a great business. And they just happened into this thing, asking people stupid questions on the street, and it's become a thing. I mean, they're huge.
Yeah, absolutely. And well, there in that second reel that I saw from you, where they tag you, and you talk about being a super connector or being a connector. Okay. Can you explain a little bit about it? What is for you being a connector?
So your listeners know, that's the School of Hard Knocks, and they spell knocks funny. It's like KONN. Like there's a Z in there, you'll find it. They got tens of thousands of millions of viewers, I think. But anyways, absolutely. So the word super connector is something that was given to me. I didn't make that up. Like people would say, "Oh, he's a super connector," and I'm like, "Oh, okay." And so I started out doing business development at you probably heard of the company PricewaterhouseCoopers. So I was when Pricewaterhouse and Coopers and Lybrand merged to create the largest accounting firm in the world. They recruited me to be their very first business development person, and so my
Okay.
job was to sell audits. And that's a boring thing to sell. I'm married to an auditor, and it sounds so boring. And so I thought, nobody wants to buy an audit. Like all successful companies need it. And so I had to figure out, how do I make an audit sexy so people want it? And so I realized that the firm I was working for audits the largest companies in the world and most of the venture capital funds in the world. And so what I figured out, for emerging companies that wanted to be big companies, if I introduced them to sources of financing and to large customers, that they would love me. And I did. That's what I did. And I became very popular because I was doing everybody favors, getting them customers, getting them funding. And then they would, when they needed an audit, they would work with us. And so we won so many new clients, we didn't have enough people to deliver the work. And so thus the name Super Connector took hold. And I started doing that in all of my jobs, right? And so when I worked for another law firm, very large law firm, that also needed to win clients, and rather than going and selling legal services, I would go and I would say, who do you need to get to know to help you with your business? And I would make those introductions for them. And so that's how I became the Super Connector.
Wow. And let's suppose that somebody wants to start doing the same. So what are the steps that you recommend to be a super connector and help in different interests?
Well, you start small, right? And a lot of people watching, they might be in college and they're saying, I don't know anybody. I can't. Well, you do, somebody. So if you're in college and you're interviewing for a job, you might have just interviewed for a job that you're not going to take, right? You don't want to work for that company, but the person who just interviewed you, and you have a classmate who wants to get a job too. And you can say, hey, Sue or Billy or whatever, Axel, what are you looking to do? Oh, I just met a guy from that company. I'm not going to work there, but let me introduce you to that person. You have just become a mini super connector, and you just start with what you have, right? You may only know a couple people, but if you can make meaningful connections, I'm not talking about like random silly connections that don't make sense, but like if somebody is looking for something and another friend of yours has what that person's looking for, you make an introduction, and maybe you do it like we call it a double opt-in introduction, where you say, Axel, I know this guy who's looking to get on a podcast in Argentina. Would this be of interest to you? And if you look at him and you say no, then I'm not going to introduce you. But if you say, yeah, please introduce me to that person, and then I introduce you, I've just connected the two of you. And so you start small, and then you work your way up over time, and you'll get better and better and better at it as time goes on.
Wow. And when you connect these two necessities or person, your job ends, or maybe if there is a deal, for example, you take a commission of that. So how do you work just with this? Or maybe you start just trying to just do genuine connections, and then you start maybe improving that process.
So for me, I was doing that just as a favor. All right.
Wow.
And so because I had a job that paid me to benefit from those connections that I was making. So I did that for 25 years. Where I just did favors for people. Now that I'm off on my own, and I have my own consulting business, now I've got to figure out which of these connections am I going to charge for, right? Because I got to make money too, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
I got to pay my bills, and so I don't charge for everything that I do, but there's certain things that I do. For example, we have a business called Capital Raise, where we've taken all of the investors I've gotten to know over all those years, and we packaged it up into a business. And so companies will hire us to help them get connected to sources of capital. For that, we charge. For that, I don't do that for free anymore. I did for a long time. But if it's an angel investor, say it's an angel investor, we do venture capitalists. And so if I know an angel investor that'll help somebody out, I'll just do that free of charge. Like, that's not part of my business. It's too small, but for the larger stuff, we charge for, right? And then there's other people that will want to raise money from family offices or private equity. And I don't have that many connections in those arenas. And so I will refer that to other friends of mine, and they have their own business models. And so I have
Okay.
deals with, I have deals with them. So if I refer them a company and they get them as a customer, they'll pay me something. But I don't try to think about money on every one of these things I do. I don't, right? I mean, if you do well by people, you do favors for people, it comes back to you in spades.
Okay. And for somebody that wanna get inside, let's suppose, this environment, because there are not environment that anybody can just get there and start making relationship. Maybe there has like some barriers. What are the steps or maybe the actions that you can take to get inside those high network environment?
Well, so you need to think about who you need to know, who's going to make you successful in your career, right? And so, for me, for the kind of work I was doing, venture capitalists were very important. They invest money in companies, and so I needed to get to know them. And so you need to figure out, where do these people congregate? Like, where do I need to go to meet them? They're just not going to show up at your door wanting to meet you. So you need to figure out, what associations do they join? What conferences do they attend? And then you need to be thoughtful about going to those conferences. And then when you go there to meet them, bring value to them. You always got to bring value to people. And so venture capitalists need to do two things. They need to raise money for their funds. And so they need limited partners to invest in their funds. So if you can get to know the folks that invest in those kind of funds, then you can help them with that. And they need companies to invest in. And that's called deal flow. And so I got really good at finding the deal flow that would be of interest to the venture capitalists. And so when you say, I have deal flow that might be of interest to you, then they want to talk with you. And then when you go to meet the companies that want to get to know these funds, they typically congregate at the same places, and you tell them about the network that you've built of investors. It's hard for them to get to know these folks as well. And so, helping them navigate that world, then you become valuable to those companies as well. So it takes time, it takes effort, and it takes, I mean, I've been doing this for 25 years. That's a long time. And so anybody who wants to start today trying to get to know investors, it's going to be hard for them to do that. And especially if they're trying to build a business at the same time. That's why they hire us to help them, because I can save them time, because I've already done all the legwork to get to know those folks.
I love it. I love it.
I'm still doing this stuff. Actually, I'm still doing this stuff. I mean, I'm going to a conference in 2 weeks that there's people there I want to get to know, because it's the kind of consulting work that I'm doing. I just signed up for the event. I paid the money. I got the airplane tickets. I got a place to stay. But now I need to do some legwork and figure out, who do I want to get to know when I get there? Because I know that the people I want to get to know are going to be there, but who specifically do I want to try to cultivate relationships with? And then I've got to have an action plan to go and meet those people. And when I meet them, I've got to be talking about them about things that are of interest to them, not me, not what they can do for me, what I can do to help them.
Yeah. So, Carl, do you ever think in creating, because this is a really, really good skill, and you also have real experience, knowing that nowadays everybody is just selling a service of something that they have learned, and maybe they are not good like you. So do you ever think in creating like a service where you can teach people to be a super connector, to get inside these spaces, because you have a lot of experience?
Yeah, in fact, I just launched it. I don't know if you saw that. I launched it's called Rainmakers Business Development Training.
That business is about this.
Yeah, I just launched it. So I just released my first 12 videos where I teach people how to do this. And they're short videos. They're like 2 to 5 minutes. They're not long videos, because I give people 3 points, and then I give them an action item to work on, and then I tell them what's in the next thing. So don't watch all. I'm going to record 40 videos. Don't watch them all at once. Watch them one at a time, and then do what I tell you to do. Go do it, practice it, and then come back and watch the next video. Right? And so I just launched it and literally just put it out this week. And so I'm not even sure if anybody signed up yet, but I got to check back on that. And I'm starting to do I'm doing a free like PDF with some tips that I'm going to give away to get people kind of interested. And I'm going to do some webinars, where I'm going to talk to people, and then they can take the classes. I've got to go above and beyond. I'm practicing what I preach, right? You got to give a little bit, right? And so people know, and you got to be accessible, and and so I'm doing it, but I'm trying to do it in a business model. It's cheap. It's under $100. It's cheap, but it you're taking 25 years of my experience, and you're learning how to do this. And so, and you got to wait. I've got a couple more videos already recorded, so it'll be like 13 and 14, and then I got to record some more videos, but I'm working on it. I've got all the scripts in they're all on my desk ready to go. I just need to sit down in front of this computer and record them.
Yeah, you're going to be finished doing a high ticket service if you find the right niche to the right people, because it's a massive value that you're sharing, like really. So I'm gonna link down the video, and also I'm gonna let down the link to the Amazon ebook to the people that can just get access to that. And Carl, keep on the line with this that we were talking. You have been around people who has millionaire business or maybe billionaires. If we have to say like 3 or 4 things that these people want, okay, so what are the values that they have? What are the things that they're expecting to achieve, or how somebody can help them to achieve?
Well, yeah, I do know millionaires and billionaires. That's for sure. And plenty of them, because that's the kind of work that I do. And they're no different than anybody else, right? They just have more money, right? And but all of them have needs. And you find that a lot of them aren't any happier than you or me, right? I mean, I literally have been in the homes of some of the richest people in the world. And
wow.
Just because they're the richest
Jeff
people
Bezos?
in the world. I have a friend who lived in his home in DC.
Really?
I haven't been in his. He was friends with Jeff Bezos, and he lived in his, because Jeff Bezos owns the Washington Post, and so he's got a massive home in DC. I just never been there, but I've been to other really nice homes, and it doesn't. They don't live any longer than you and me. They're not any happier than you and me. Their kids aren't any more perfect than my kids. You know what I mean? They all have problems. Their marriages aren't perfect, and so the stuff I talk about, it applies to them. When I talk about living an abundant life, they're like, I've got financial abundance, but I don't have abundance in my relationships. People just want to know me for my money. Like women, they want to get to know them for their money. I mean, the kids want their money. Everybody wants their money. I don't want their money. When I meet people like that, I don't treat them any different than anybody else. I don't. In fact, I've taken some of these people to lunch. I pay for lunch. Just because they're a billionaire, I don't expect them to pay for lunch, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Sometimes I see how much they're worth, and I'm like, oh, you should have paid for lunch. But I don't operate that way, right? And when you just treat them like normal people, they like that. They like that, right? Because most people don't treat them that way. I've met royalty, and it's they're not really that much different than you and me when you get to know them.
Absolutely.
They get cancer just like we do, right? And so I'm just saying, I've seen their problems, and you gotta treat them like human beings, and you gotta meet them where they are, and don't think of them as their bank account. Think of them as a human being that they got to go to the bathroom the same way you and I do. They got pains and aches and pains, and they get older, and the same stuff I'm telling them, they wrestle with these same things.
Yeah. Can I ask you, Carl, in terms of mentors? Okay, do you have mentors around your life, around your journey, and also do you have like a business owner model in your mind, something that somebody that you admire as a human, not just as a business owner, as a human?
I haven't had formal mentors like some people do, where like you're going to be my mentor. No, but I've had people who have mentored me over the years, right? From my dad, growing up, he was a great mentor, right?
Wow.
And then as I moved through, I had certain people in the military, that I looked up to, that I took away from them because they were great leaders, right? I was the aide to the adjutant general of Virginia, a guy named Carol Thaxton. He's since passed away, but he was a wonderful man. He was beloved by everybody in the military that he commanded, and I just watched as I served him. I watched how he did things, and it's like that works for him. I'm going to use that. I'm going to, so you can take a little bit from every person you meet, and like, you can't take everybody and put them up on a pedestal and think they're perfect, because nobody's perfect in all aspects of their life. So I'm very much into fitness and health. I told you that. Arnold Schwarzenegger played a big role in kind of influencing me as a young man. Is he perfect? No, he's not perfect. But there's elements of his life that are amazing, right? For a guy to come from another country, Austria, come to the United States and to become the #1 bodybuilder in the world, and then say, I'm going to become the #1 movie star in the world. And he did it. And then I'm going to go into politics, and he did it. Like, right. So whether or not you like him or respect him, he was successful in bodybuilding, he was successful in movies, and he was successful in politics, right? He might not have been successful in everything, but you take the good and you leave the bad, right? And so I do that with everybody. And you know what? Sometimes these people that are really good in certain areas, where I'm learning from them in certain areas, there's other areas where they're not so good. They can actually learn from me, right? And so that's where, like, iron sharpens iron. I'm going to learn from the things that are great about you, but here's some things that you can learn from me about. And let's talk about those things. And so I think it's a give and take.
Yeah, I love it. I love it. And okay, and everybody is like having like troubles, problems every day with business, family, yourself, with your mind. So how do you keep in yourself your energy in your day by day when you have problems, when you have troubles? What is your secret, Carl?
So ever since I moved to Texas, this is something I started in 2020. So this has not been my entire life. This has been the past, not even 5 years. So I drove from the East Coast to Texas. I don't know if you know U.S. geography. That's a 2-day drive.
Yeah, I have been in the United States many times because my uncle lives there in Tampa, in Florida, Tampa.
All right. So I don't know if you've driven across, but it's a long drive. 2 days. And so 2 days in the car, you got a lot to think about in 2 days. And I did that drive 4 times. All right. And so that's, what is that? 2 days each time. It's like 8 days in the car. And so I listened to a lot of books. I ran out of books, I listened to podcasts. And when I ran out of podcasts, I started listening to sermons. I started listening to pastors who had sermons on various things that I hadn't listened to in years. And I was out of things to listen to. So I'm listening to these guys, and I'm thinking, they got some good points, and a lot of these pastors that I was listening to were quoting the promises that God has made to us in his word. And I'm like, wow, this was some really powerful promises. And so I said to my wife, I think we were in Nashville, halfway to Texas. I'm like, hey, when we get to Texas, can I create a list of these promises that God has in his word? And can we quote these promises out loud? This may seem silly, but I'm telling you, this works, right? Because there's a lot of them in there. But right now, so right now we're doing financial promises. There's certain financial promises he has. And so my wife and I, every morning, we wake up. I wake up before she does. I get her up at 5 a.m. And it sounds early, but I'm up before that so I can wake up, and I walk the dog and make the coffee. I do all that before 5 a.m. And so I get her up at 5. And so I've been up now for an hour and a half, and I get her up, and we do a Bible study together.
Wow,
we'll
beautiful.
Read 3 chapters, Old Testament, Psalms, or Proverbs, and New Testament. And then after we're done with that, we pray together. And we take turns. So one day I'll do it, one day she'll do it. And so that keeps us grounded. And then after we're done with that, we have these promises. And some days I will lead by quoting these promises out loud. And sometimes we'll pray, we'll say, Father in heaven, we are claiming these words for our life. We know this is a promise from your word, and we're quoting this from your word, and we're believing what you've put in your word, and we're claiming this for our life. And when we started doing that, you'd be amazed. It's like that my friend who says I don't get sick. I'm telling you, when you think something and you speak it into
Wow.
action, there's power in a spoken word, right?
Wow.
In fact,
can you give an example, Carl? Sorry, can you give then an example? Like, for example, how do you structure that sentence to say to empower people?
Yeah. In fact, looking for here's my phone. I'm gonna grab my phone. I've got them on my phone.
If you want to share, for sure, it's because it's personal.
Yeah.
I know.
But let me tell you. So let's go back to the beginning. If you believe in the Bible and you believe in God, even if you don't, I'm going to tell you. So when God created the world, and the interesting thing is, Axel, I had an Israeli friend of mine who's now an American citizen, but he grew up in Israel speaking Hebrew, and he's a PhD in physics, and he also has studied the Kabbalah, and he's an interesting guy, right? Not a Christian, but a Jewish believer, and so he said, you must study the Bible with me in Hebrew. And I'm like, really? I have to do this? And he goes, yeah, you have to do this. And I'm like, I'm trying to get out of it. I'm like, I don't think I have to do this. He wouldn't take no as an answer. He goes, you must do this. And so I found myself every Tuesday meeting with him for an hour. We would spend an hour studying one verse, one sentence in Hebrew. And we went through all of the words in Hebrew, and he explained to me using physics. He's a PhD in physics about how the spoken word, when God spoke the world into existence, he created everything that exists in this world by speaking the words, right? And so this is, I guess, the beginning of me understanding the power of the spoken word. So if God can speak the entire universe into creation, if we can speak over our bank account or over a relationship and speak that into reality, then you've just done your own creation. I mean, you think about, I had another friend of mine talk about becoming a parent. He goes, becoming a parent is an awesome responsibility. He goes, because you're a co-creator with God, right? And I think, wow, that's, I never thought of it that way. Like, you're co-creating this human being, right? And so I have my verses here. So the first one is, we walk by faith, not by sight. That's the first verse. Faith, not by sight. So you may look at your bank account and it may look low, and you may say, I don't have any money. You know what? I'm gonna believe the words that I'm about to quote to you over my bank account. The next verse, it's Philippians 4:19. It says, and my God will meet all of my needs according to the riches of his glory in Christ Jesus. He will meet all of my needs. Okay. And so I'm going to tell you a real life situation about this verse coming into reality. All right. So my largest client, I have a consulting business. My largest client, we're doing this in April, right? So the end of February, I think it was the end of February, my largest client contract came to an end. And they changed upper management of this firm, and the new chief operating officer said, we're not funding consultants anymore. So my contract wasn't renewed, and that was worth about $25,000 a month. That's a lot of money. I mean, at $25,000. And so all of a sudden, I don't have I have other clients, but my largest client isn't paying anymore. And so I'm still very good friends with these people. Did work for them for like 2 years. And so I got an email from a friend. I was an advisor to a company. And I never thought this thing would be worth anything, but he sends me an email. Investors are coming in. They valued his company at some ridiculous number, and they're buying out some of the previous investors. he couldn't buy out all of my stock. I just had a little bit of stock. It wasn't a lot. I was just an
Yeah.
advisor, and he said the amount of your stock that we can buy back is $26,000.
What?
I got more money the next month than I had the previous month, and
Wow.
what does this verse say? My God will meet all of my needs according to his riches, the riches of his glory in Christ Jesus. I'm not going to go through all of those verses, but that's just an example of how that works. Okay. Now, that was for March. April is shaping up. And you know what? I'm trusting in God. I've got multiple opportunities that are in front of me, and people who are calling me. I have another client that was supposed to close like at the beginning of the year. We were supposed to start in January. It hasn't happened. It's April, but they called me 2 days ago and they said, you know what? I got a new boss and I got to work things out. I want you to call me in 2 weeks. And so, and I've got that going now with two clients that are potentially bigger than my other client. And so,
Wow.
you know what? I'm walking by faith. What did the verse say? By faith, not by sight. And so
Wow.
I don't wake up worried like, oh, well, we're going to run out of money. No, I don't worry. I mean, honestly, I've saved up enough money that I could last for years, but I don't want to draw, my savings out. I want to earn the money now. And so, but I'm not earning it. God's providing it because I know where it comes from. So that's an example of how that works.
I love it. I love it, Carl. So before we finish this podcast, I just want to ask you the last question, Carl. So what is your purpose? Not just in a professional way, in a personal way also in your life. What is your purpose? What do you want to impact in other people?
So my purpose in life is to glorify God above all else, right? If I'm glorifying myself, shame on me. And hopefully, through this podcast, you realize this is not about me. It's about him, right? And so if I'm not glorifying him, I'm not doing what he put me on. Like he redeemed my life from the life that I used to have to what it is today, right? He's not providing for me so I can go and thump my chest and go, oh, I just got this money from this guy. No, I'm saying where it came from. And so, when I go and I'm doing a lot of business in the Middle East now, and if you read my book, you'll see that I became a Christian at the age of 24, but 10 years later, I read the Quran, and I didn't know anything about what the other half of the world believes. Zero. I didn't know anything, but I picked up the book and I read it in 1 week, and I was like, oh, now I understand what they believe. Like now I understand. And so I haven't understood. I've like actually read more of the Quran than most Muslims, right? Because not all of them read the whole book, but I did, right? And so now I host an interfaith, a global interfaith ministry called Bridges of Faith, where it's about half Christians, half Muslims. We get on every 2 weeks and we study verses from the Old Testament, the Quran, and the New Testament. And it's unbelievable. I mean, because I have ground rules, like nobody's allowed to try to convert anybody. We're not to argue with everybody. We're not to hate on each other. Like we're there to love each other and learn from each other and share with each other, right? We have to do this all in the spirit of love. And so it's been a really beautiful experience because the people come and somebody will say something that I know is different than what the other people believe. And I'll say, all right, what you just said is different than what the Muslims believe, and so let's not argue about this, but let's talk about this, and so I'm a good moderator because I can play kind of the neutral guy, even though I'm a Christian. I don't make any bones about it. I'm a believer in the risen Christ, but when I put on my moderator hat, I'm kind of like, the television host who has to pretend like he doesn't have political views. Some of them do it better than others, right? But I do a pretty good job of it because I can say this is what Islam teaches because I know I read it, like I study it, right? Or this is what Christianity teaches, right? Or this is what Judaism teaches, right? Like, and we'll do a deep dive. And so because we've done it that way, and our focus is not on like arguing with each other, we're focused on really getting to know God and sharing our perspectives. It's beautiful because like the next meeting, and I let people vote on this stuff. Like I'm not like this guy who says we're gonna do this.
Yeah.
I said, all right, Ramadan just passed, right? And I said, Ramadan's coming up. Do you guys want to meet during Ramadan? And we could study fasting. We could study these things because Christians fast too, but not like they do in Ramadan. And they said, no, we don't want to meet. We want to, the time that we would be meeting is when we're breaking our fast and we're all going to be with our families eating. And so they don't want to meet. So, all right, so we took off a month. And so we met last weekend. And then, and so we try to meet every 2 weeks. 2 weeks from last weekend is Easter. And I said, all right, the next April 20th is Easter. Do you guys want to meet on Easter? I said, if we meet on Easter, like we met, I think, right before Christmas. And we, once again, you can't meet like right before Christmas. I'm not talking about Christmas, right? Or whatever holidays come in. And so Easter's coming up. I said, you guys want to meet on Easter? And they all said they want to meet on Easter. I said, well, we're going to talk about the resurrection of Jesus, or they call him Isa. And so, what you find is Muslims believe in Jesus as the Messiah, but they don't believe that he's the risen Savior. Right?
Okay.
It's different, right? But they believe he's coming back to rule and reign. And so, we're going to be talking about, I said, this is going to be something that you guys don't necessarily believe in. Although there is a verse in the Quran that says, blessed be the day I was born, the day I'll die, and the day I'll be resurrected. It's in the book of Miriam, right? And so we've talked about that verse. We'll talk about it again because there's different interpretations of that verse. But look, this is how we get to know each other. This is how we glorify God because, look, does he want us talking about these things? I think he does. And I'm not trying to, I don't want anybody to change their religion, but let's talk about what you believe within your religion, right? You believe in Jesus? Let's talk about who Jesus is. Let's talk. We both believe he's the Messiah, right? What does that look like? What does that mean? How are we to behave ourselves? How do we get right with God? And that's today, that's what I'm doing to glorify God. Maybe 5-10 years from now, it'll be something different, but that's how I'm doing it today.
I love it. And also making great podcast.
Making great podcast. I used to host my own podcast. I had 2 podcasts that I did, and then I paused it to do a book. And then when I wrote the book, now people want to have me on their podcasts. And so I come and do these things, and I haven't done my own podcast yet. I might do it again, but I've been so busy doing other people's podcasts. It's actually more fun because then I don't have to go back and edit it. I don't have to go back and promote it. It's a lot of work that you got to do, right?
Yeah. Carl, it was a pleasure, a real pleasure for me having you here today. I know that we have a real conversation, and I love it. I believe that there are going to be a lot of moments along this podcast that are going to help a lot of people with the mindset, with their consciousness, with the connection with God. So again, a pleasure for your time.
Absolutely. Thank you. It was a pleasure.